The world is watching Glasgow as the global summit on the climate crisis begins. Can world leaders reach agreement to cut emissions at COP26? They are warned it is now or never.
It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now.
Chaos outside the conference as delegates faced huge queues to get in will be live across the city. Also ahead, the Salisbury train crash, the latest on the investigation, and celebrations and tears as Australians are finally allowed to fly home.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hossain.
Good afternoon. The tough talking on climate change has begun in Glasgow, so will tough international measures now follow. It's the UK's turn to host the global summit called COP at arguably the most crucial time yet in the climate crisis. This lunchtime it opened with rally calls from the Prime Minister, from Prince Charles and Sir David Attenborough. 120 world leaders were listening. It's hoped they'll commit to cutting emissions and limiting the rise in global temperatures. We'll have analysis from correspondents in the city and beyond. But first, Chloe Keedy reports on the world's moment of truth.
As the Prime Minister welcomed global leaders to Glasgow this morning, he looked at times as though he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. As well he might. They have come here not to discuss politics, but how to save the planet. Among around 120 heads of state arriving here this morning was the world's most powerful man, President Joe Biden. But as the opening ceremony got underway, the leaders of two of the world's biggest polluters were conspicuously absent.
Welcome to COP. Welcome to Glasgow.
The Prime Minister will be hoping that China and Russia are at least listening.
Humanity has long since run down the clock on climate change. It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now. If we don't get serious about climate change today, it will be too late for our children to do so tomorrow.
COP26 is seen as the moment when world leaders must deliver on promises they made at the conference in Paris 6 years ago. The summit's top priority is getting nations to stick to the target they agreed then, limiting global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees by cutting emissions. To do that, countries will be encouraged to speed up the phasing out of coal, curtail deforestation, and accelerate the switch to electric vehicles. And developed countries are being asked to contribute to a $100 billion fund to help poorer countries combat climate change. Because it's the world's major economies that account for 80% of global emissions. At the G20 summit in Rome this weekend, their leaders were accused of failing to make concrete commitments on climate. In Glasgow today, Prince Charles stumbled as he made his way up to the stage, but his words didn't falter.
The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us just how devastating a global cross-border threat can be. Climate change and biodiversity loss are no different. In fact, they pose an even greater existential threat, to the extent that we have to put ourselves on what might be called a warlike footing.
As speeches got underway inside, many of the hundreds of thousands of delegates were stuck outside queuing. They'll be here for the next 2 weeks, trying to come up with a solution to the climate crisis. The world is holding its breath. Chloe Keedy, ITV News.
While negotiations begin inside the conference centre, activists outside are making sure their voices are heard. Our Scotland correspondent Peter Smith joins me now. Who else is in Glasgow then?
Well, as well as those more than 100 world leaders and 30,000 delegates on that side of the River Clyde, surrounded by this ring of steel, there are more than 100,000 activists coming to Glasgow over the next fortnight, keen for their voices to be heard. Of course, the most prominent environmentalist campaigner in the world, Greta Thunberg, arrived in Glasgow on Saturday night, and to this afternoon she had the opportunity to meet Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. She made her message very clear. She's also going to be holding a rally. Her group, the school striking group, the Striking for the Futures, are holding a rally in Glasgow at 2 o'clock this afternoon. There'll be a press conference this afternoon. We're waiting to see if Greta Thunberg will be addressing the media. Of course, another one of the major groups here with a lot of attention on them is Extinction Rebellion. I spoke to some of their activists. They're saying they will be bringing disruption to this conference. Their aim is not to disrupt the people of the city, but to disrupt the delegates, because they're fed up trying to reason with them. They're not convinced that the world leaders are taking this seriously at all. They believe that the world leaders are going to fudge this, that they're going to celebrate some loose commitment to 1.5 or 2 degrees warming as a success. They say that is disastrous for the world, and that's why they're here to hold those world leaders to account, to say the time for talking is over. Now is the time for action, and they want to see firm commitments to make sure that we have a future and that the leaders here are going to be held to account.
Peter Smith, thank you very much for that. Thank you. The Queen will address the delegates in a pre-recorded video later, after she was told by doctors to avoid the summit and rest following her recent hospital visit. But other senior royals are in the city. I'm joined now by our royal editor, Chris Shipp. It's not just Prince Charles, then, who is there?
Yes, well, obviously the notable person missing is the Queen, who had to pull out last week because of her ill health. She has recorded a video message that the delegates, the world leaders, will listen to tonight at a reception. Incidentally, we know she was well enough to record that on Friday. She's also been seen out and about in Windsor today. But the bulk of the work, therefore, has been left to Prince Charles and Camilla, and also to William and Kate, all four of whom are here and will make their presence felt. We've already heard from Prince Charles on the main conference stage, and it's interesting that he's focusing a lot of his attention on the private sector. His message to the world leaders was actually, you don't have the money to do this. You need to set the targets. You need to set these sort of market signals, as it's called, for them to act and invest in the right kind of things. He said they are the ones who have the access to trillions of dollars, and they are the ones ultimately who can make a difference, not governments. It's governments, however, that need to set the appropriate targets. So a lot of work then. And don't forget, this is something that Prince Charles has been speaking about for 50 years, and he sees this as a bit of a moment for the world to catch up, if you like, with his way of thinking. But in the meantime, those leaders will be listening very closely to see what the Queen has to say when she speaks to them in that video message this evening.
Chris Shipp, thank you very much. Well, one leader not at the summit is China's President Xi. I'm joined by our Asia correspondent, Debbie Edward. What impact could his absence have on what could be achieved here?
Well, Nina, quite simply, without President Xi there, we're unlikely to see China signing up to any greater climate change pledges than those to which it's already committed. There will be a Chinese delegation in Glasgow, but they'll be going with a very strict brief, and they won't be able to have the power to make any decisions or enter any negotiations without the President's say-so. And the fact that Xi hasn't gone himself indicates that we won't be seeing any headline-grabbing promises from China. The message we're getting here in Beijing is that China's already been ambitious enough. It's already going further and faster than any other major economy in reducing its emissions. But many will see President Xi's failures to go to Glasgow as an indication of his intentions, and the team that he has sent to Scotland is going to have a very hard time convincing the rest of the world that the one country that's so crucial in all of our efforts to save the planet is willing to play its role. President Xi has already had his remote participation reduced from a video message to a statement being published online, and that really doesn't bode well for the kind of reception that the Chinese are going to receive in Glasgow, or the potential of a breakthrough agreement.
And Jane Hill in the studio.
Debbie Edward,
and
thank you. Well, with no
with
China at the talks and the presidents of other key countries also missing, such as Russia and Brazil, can they really make a difference to what is clearly a global problem? Let's join our political editor, Robert Peston, at the conference centre. Can they? What are those who are there hoping to achieve?
So I think we should just start with a note of caution. This conference is convened, actually there's one of these every single year, by the United Nations, and their Secretary General, Guterres, said today that even on the most optimistic interpretation of greenhouse gas emissions, we are looking at climate catastrophe. Boris Johnson, we are in the role of President of the UK for the next couple of weeks, is very keen to achieve two things. One is to get some more commitments on really important initiatives like, phasing out coal power stations for the developed countries by 2030, for developing countries by 2040. And as we've just heard, the fact that China is not here makes all of that much more challenging, given they are far and away the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world, and as yet they have given no date for phasing out the use of coal within their borders, although they have said they won't finance coal power stations outside their borders. Now, for me, I'm not quite as pessimistic as everybody, I think, at the moment is about China. The main reason they're not here is because they want to show that they are a powerful, independent power. They slightly resent what they see as the so-called convening power of the West. They'll do whatever they want to do on coal in their own time. But it is certainly absurd, the idea that they've gone further and faster than any other nation. I think there is a chance that this summit will achieve something very important. And what that is keeping alive these negotiations after the COP26 is finished. On previous precedents, we wouldn't get back to renegotiating reductions of greenhouse gas emissions per country for another 5 years. The most important thing they can achieve is to keep the talks going with China, with the whole world.
Robert Peston, thank you very much for that. Thank you. And for the latest updates on the big climate talks, visit our website, itv.com/news. Still to come, campaigners call for an end to the postcode lottery for fertility treatment. And delight as Australia reopens its borders. But first, a detailed investigation has begun into a train crash in Salisbury. 13 people were taken to hospital to be treated after a second train went into the back of a service that derailed in a tunnel last night. The driver of one of the trains has been described as having life-changing injuries. It's expected disruption to services will last for days. Sejal Karia has the latest.
First light revealed the full extent of last night's crash between the two trains that left 17 people injured and a train driver trapped as one train crashed into another that had derailed near Salisbury station, with passengers describing the panic on board.
In my carriage, a lot of girls started screaming. I tried to get everybody to move to the side of the train that was tilted up so that it wouldn't roll over any further. During the jostling and the juddering, it all went black, and I remember seeing red flashes.
Despite earlier reports of one train derailing after hitting an object, investigations have so far found no evidence of that. What then led to a second train hitting the first is still unclear. A detailed forensic investigation is now underway.
At the moment, the site is controlled by the British Transport Police, and we're working closely with them. Once we get access to the site, we will then carry out our own investigation as well. But we're supporting a number of investigations which will go on into this incident to make sure we thoroughly understand what went wrong.
There were no fatalities, but emergency services had to cut free one of the train drivers from the wreckage. He's said to have life-changing injuries.
It's been a terrible accident, and obviously we're really thankful there were no fatalities in this. There were a number of people that were injured, including our train driver, who is stable in hospital.
The line remains closed and disruptions expected for several more days, as crash investigators now try to understand how and why this happened. Sejal Karia, ITV News.
I'm joined now by our West of England correspondent Rupert Evelyn, who is at the scene of last night's crash. Investigators working very hard then to find out how this actually happened.
That's absolutely right. And if you were sort of paying attention to what Cedra was saying, there were a few significant changes that have come out in the last half an hour in terms of this investigation. One is that the ruling out, I think, of the object on the line. That seems to have proved to be unfounded. The other is that there appears to be no significant delay. That's the words of British Transport Police in terms of the derailment and the other train colliding. I did ask them whether we were talking seconds or minutes. They said minutes, but it may well be even shorter than that. It sounds as though, because the driver of the first train didn't have time to hit any emergency button, it sounds as though there was very little delay between the one train running into trouble and the other one hitting it. So I think a lot of the investigation is now focused on why these two trains came together and what precisely caused such a devastating accident.
Rupert Evelyn, thank you. Across the UK, many people hoping to have children require fertility treatment and turn to the NHS. But a charity has warned getting that assistance in England is still very much a postcode lottery. Fertility Network UK says access to NHS-funded treatment is being rationed, leaving some patients either facing huge bills or unable to get help. 3.5 million people in the UK are dealing with fertility issues, but the charity says nearly 90% of England's clinical commissioning groups don't offer the recommended 3 IVF cycles to eligible women under 40. And 72% don't offer 1 cycle to eligible women between 40 and 42. Kim Tonks paid for private treatment after being told she wasn't entitled to NHS funding because her partner had had children from a previous relationship.
It's been very, very emotionally draining and stressful. And during the process, I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression as a direct result of the fertility issues that I was having. So it has been really, really draining. And I found that obviously saving up as well, money, has been really stressful.
Well, Kim is not alone. I'm joined now by Gwenda Burns, the Chief Executive of the charity. Thank you for talking to us. This has clearly a massive impact on those who can't get treatment on the NHS simply because of where they live.
Yes, it's absolutely devastating. I think it's really important to remember that infertility has been classified as a disease, and people who cannot become parents without medical help are as deserving of health care as others. The situation with regards provision has always been a topic that has needed work. However, a lot of CCGs are actually redefining the definition of a cycle.
Why do you think the CCGs are the clinical commissioning groups? Why do you think there still isn't a standard offering across England then? Why are some organisations making decisions that don't go along with the recommendations?
So the recommendations from NICE are clear, and as is the definition of a cycle, but it is purely driven by finances because it is not and does not have any clinical evidence to support the measures and the provision that CCGs are putting in place that aren't offering the recommended NICE.
Your findings also show that some same-sex couples are being denied treatment in some areas of England. So it's not just where you live, but who you are that will determine whether you might be able to try for a baby.
That's correct. And even if you can access treatment, in the majority of places in England, you're actually expected to pay for between 6 to 12 DI or IUI cycles before you can embark on your NHS entitlement. So it's really muddying the waters there even more because it's mixing private and NHS.
OK, Gwenda Burns, thank you very much for your thoughts on this issue. Thank you. The number of people who have died from COVID globally has reached 5 million. In the UK, booster jabs are now being offered at walk-in centres to drive uptake. And finally, Australia is open for the first time since the pandemic began in March 2020. Australians can enter the country without the need to quarantine. Cue tears, embraces and laughter at Sydney's International Airport. Sangeeta Kandola on the much-longed-for Love Actually style reunions.
Sounds of cheers, laughter and tears filled the arrivals hall at 6 a.m. in Sydney.
Oh my gosh. I'm so grateful I could be here, but I need to get to my daughter. I gotta hold her.
Australia reopened its borders to fully vaccinated citizens and residents, reuniting loved ones, kept apart by the travel ban for 20 months. There were emotional scenes, excitement and endless embraces.
It's just quite emotional flying down and seeing the lights as we were landing.
Just the energy on the plane was insane. It's so good to be back. To actually make it home now and not have to do quarantine is just amazing.
Even like walking through and hearing people speak with the Australian accent, it's just good to be back home.
We're a bit overwhelmed.
The new freedoms have lifted quarantine for double-jabbed Australians, but the easing of restrictions for Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra have been helped by a surge in high vaccination rates in some states there. But other states are still out of bounds. Hard to bear for some, like Mark, who was unable to see his ill mother in Perth.
And we know we've got to protect people's lives, but you've got to bring families together again. You have to.
In Sydney, though, many have been brought back together after one of the lengthiest and strictest travel controls anywhere in the world. After almost 600 days, they can freely walk out of these airport doors and head home. Sangeeta Kandola, ITV News.
That's all we've got time for so far today, but do join Mary live in Glasgow for tonight's evening news at 6:30 from me and the Lunchtime team. Bye-bye.